Philosophy is a pretty diverse field in terms of the subjects that we teach. There's everything from political philosophy and ethics and moral philosophy to philosophy of physics, philosophy of math and logic, and a spectrum in between. I think what unites them is first and foremost a study of argumentation and a emphasis on constructing rigorous arguments and analyzing arguments, critiquing them to arrive at a reflective, settled view on difficult issues, and also the history of the subject. Everyone who studies philosophy is exposed to traditional texts in the Western canon that provide a set of questions and a set of options, responses to them about the nature of justice, the nature of truth, the nature of knowledge, and so on. Well, famously, people say that philosophy is giving a theory of how it all hangs together. And I think that that is still an important way of thinking about philosophy. It's non-specialized to some degree because it's one way of thinking of things that tries to integrate knowledge from a diverse range of fields. Of course, the danger then is that philosophers are masters of nothing, jack of all trades, master of none. And so some philosophers do specialize in one particular area, becoming a philosopher of language, a philosopher of physics, a philosopher of biology, or a philosopher of politics. But what unifies the field, I think, is that attempt to provide an integrated view of large and diverse bodies of knowledge. Well, I think the philosophy major is special for a number of reasons. First off, you do get exposed to these original texts, historical texts, Plato and Aristotle, Hume and Kant, and even some more recent works. But I think what makes it special is how at an early stage you're already stepping into the arguments. It's not, philosophical questions don't have a settled answer. I mean, there's a number of bad answers, incoherent answers, or answers to philosophical questions that don't take into account what's been written before and what's understood. But it's not like there's a body of doctrine you have to master and then go on to create your own work. It's not even like math, where you need to spend many, many years developing the techniques to advance an area of mathematical research. In philosophy, we already have you thinking critically, criticizing texts, and creating your own work from your freshman year on. And so it's active and creative in a way that some of the other disciplines are not. Well, I'm focused on philosophy of psychology more generally, and within that, the intersection between psychology and philosophy, within that, moral psychology more specifically, and the history of that study. What drew me to it originally, I think, was political philosophy. When I was in high school and starting my undergraduate work, was Marx and debates over politics and the theoretical debates that underlie, specific questions about what the rate of taxation should be or how we should organize ourselves, like the theoretical aspects of that. But I went to Tufts University, and there was a famous philosopher there who's still around named Daniel Dennett, who had just published a book called Consciousness Explained. So I was caught up in the birth of philosophy of mind, well, not the birth of philosophy of mind, but sort of the scientific study of consciousness, which was very big at the time and still continues to be. I mean, it's grown enormously since then. But I was sucked into that world and trying to give an explanation of how consciousness and mind could emerge from first, non-organic processes, or even computational processes with a specific view of things. But yeah, the nature of consciousness is what really pulled me in fully. Well, obviously, Intro to Philosophy gives you a nice introduction to the topic, and introduction to ethics and critical thinking. Those are our three sort of feed-ins, depending on whether you're interested in logic and philosophy of language, more general interest in philosophy and the history and breadth of the subject, or we do have a ethics and public policy tract. And so if that's what you're most interested in, philosophy of law, philosophy of politics, and and that line of inquiry, then the introduction to ethics is a good route in. Well, if a student wants to major in philosophy, I think it's good to start off with Intro to Philosophy, Intro to Ethics, and then find out which areas of philosophy you're most interested in. For our major, we like to make sure that you do have a well-rounded education and that you take a number of courses in the history of philosophy so you get a sense of the development of the subject over time. And then you can start to specialize taking classes in philosophy of physics, moral psychology, which is something I teach, action theory and free will and determinism, political philosophy, and just grow your interest that way, or sort of organically. And then you can pull in from other majors that are related. So if you're studying philosophy of mind, you might want to take classes in the psychology department, or computer science. If you're studying a political philosophy, take classes in the political science department, and so on. Well, to study philosophy, you're asking very general questions, big questions, questions that everyone is concerned with at some point or another, like what should I do and what should I think? Now, when they're phrased in that very general way, it's hard to get traction. So to come up with an answer, to come up with a way of thinking of things. So those questions sort of give way to more determinate answers. Like, what ought I to do? You might think, well, the one thing I have to make sure is that I'm being fair, that I'm not violating people's rights, that I'm doing what's admissible within the constraints provided by some sort of general moral framework. And so that would give rise to questions about what are rights, what is justice, what is fairness, what are the different species of those concepts, and so on. Well, I have a book that is coming out this month on what it is to believe something. That's a very general question, too. What is belief? And there's all sorts of beliefs, everything from beliefs about, that I'm being filmed right now, to beliefs about, what the proper way to live is and whether there's a God and so on. And I was brought into, when I started studying that topic, I came across the theory of belief defended by a philosopher named Alexander Bain in the late 19th century, which was very popular and served as the first textbooks, Bain's works did, for psychology in the United States, and ultimately gave rise to the American philosophy known as pragmatism. And so through this study of the nature of belief and the history of theories of belief, I've been brought into the study of American philosophy and pragmatism in particular. So I'm right now working on a paper on Bain's philosophy of mind, trying to resurrect study of his work, and also just saying how I think his insights can improve on the theories of belief being defended in cognitive science today. Well, I think, if you're an undergrad and you want to be involved in research, you should find the professor teaching the topics that interest you most and develop a rapport relationship with them and approach them about helping them with their research. Or if you have a research topic that you want to address that's related, don't be shy, come forward, because we do have independent studies and we have research that you can be awarded credit for, and it's a great way to develop a relationship with a professor that will aid you going on in your career even after you leave UCSB. The hardest thing about philosophy for many people is the sort of rigor of argumentation. There's no, for the most part, people get frustrated. You say, oh, here's my definition of justice, or here's my definition of truth, and here's my definition of knowledge, and someone proposes a counterexample to that, like, no, knowledge can't be that, because if knowledge were that, then, I would be able to know false things or something like that. And people are like, yeah, well, for the most part, my definition is right, but that doesn't work in philosophy. We really are trying to come to the truth, or as close to the truth on these subjects as we can. And so providing rigorous arguments and really sealing off your definitions from counterexamples, and understanding when a definition does have counterexamples, what those say about the concept. That is sort of what's most challenging about philosophy. I think also, some people struggle with interpreting historical texts because you have to project your mind back into the thinking of somebody in the 17th or 18th century, or even earlier than that if you're studying ancient philosophy. And another thing is that there is a sort of formal aspect to philosophy insofar as you're studying logic and the foundations of mathematics. That can be challenging for some people. But once you bring all these things together and develop those skills, it's sort of ideal for business and law and places where you do really have to write a well-constructed argument for a specific, well-framed thesis. For me, the hardest part of being a professor is that it is sort of isolating when you are researching a book and writing. I mean, teaching is wonderful. It's not hard for me. I love talking about philosophy, and it's like one of the great pleasures of my life is interacting with students and talking about these great ideas. Like philosophy itself, the activity of philosophizing for me is like one of the great source of pleasures in my life. But when I have to hold myself up in the library and stare in front of the computer and trying to work out a difficult idea, it can be kind of painful. It's rewarding, but it can be isolating and a little bit painful. Well, I gotta say that the teaching is enormously rewarding. I mean, you do get students who write you afterwards and tell you about their lives and what their time at UCSB meant to them, and it's amazing. I still have a lot of close relationships with students who have gone on to great careers in law and medicine, and Katie Tur, who was my student, our student in the philosophy department, who did a great job on the campaign trail documenting Donald Trump. So yeah, we've had a lot of really great students, and when they tell you how much they still think about what we talked about in class, it's very rewarding. What I wish students knew when they get to the first day of philosophy class is that the famous philosophers are just people. And these texts can be hard to interpret, they can be hard to understand, but you can get it. And it's rewarding when you do, because what the philosophers are arguing about remains relevant, and it can be understood in ordinary terms if you're using examples and really trying your best to understand these very general abstract debates with the help of somebody who's read the book 20 or 30 times and so has put in the legwork to figure out what's going on. So don't be intimidated by Kant or Aristotle or anyone for that matter. Don't be scared of philosophy. You don't even know. You might just fall in love with it. You start reading these books and start having conversations about these deep issues. And you won't get a chance normally in ordinary life to talk about philosophical issues like the nature of justice or the nature of beauty or truth. I mean, in most context in ordinary life, people don't want to talk to you about that, and we do. And it's your chance to really read these historically important texts with people who have been trained to interpret them and use them to spark conversations about the issues of our day. So I think, don't be afraid of philosophy. We want you. We welcome you.